Hello everyone, welcome to the Jacksonville History Show. I'm Harry Reagan. Tonight, an interview with Ed Oberlie, better known for many years on the radio as Ed Bell. You came to Jacksonville in 1946, I think.
That's right.
To do what?
Open a radio school, Institute of Radio and Television, teaching veterans radio communications.
And they would, when they finished your school, they would become engineers at a radio station?
Mostly engineers, first-class engineers.
And the school was at 8th and Main?
Yes, that's right.
Building is still there?
Two-story building. Mm-hmm. We were on the second floor.
And not long thereafter, you got into the radio business in another way as the owner of radio stations.
Yeah, in 1950, I bought WIVY. It was an independent 1,000-watt daytime station, which it still is. And at the time, I still had a radio school here. Mm. But it was winding down because the veterans program was expiring. So I closed the school and opened the radio station. And I had WIVY for 20 years. And
tell us what the landscape looked like in that era. How many radio stations were there? And you were embarking on a new venture as an independent radio station.
Yeah, I was the first independent here, WIVY, and there were 4 network stations, radio stations, mm-hmm. and WIVY was the 5th station, and the 6th station was the African-American station. And so from there it moved on to 13 stations after a year or two, and I think now there must be about 20.
And it didn't seem at the time that, well, let's say a lot of the people who were in the radio business didn't necessarily think you were going to be successful with a brand new independent station.
I had the worst facility in the market. There were 4 network stations, and I had WIVY, which is independent. At that time, if you didn't have a network, you had no station. But I had come from New York with WNEW, was a very popular music station. So I did the same programming here and put on a station playing nothing but records, music. It became what we call a music station. And within a year, most automobile had radios tuned to the music station. And in one survey over Main Street Bridge, WIVY at that time, which was the 5th station in the market, had the #1 audience in cars. Mm.
What kind of music did you play?
Popular music. That was unusual too, because this was a market that was famous for African American and country music. Mm-hmm. So I was regarded as foolish for trying to operate a popular music station in this market. Yet there must have been a lot of people from the East who tuned it in. Mm-hmm. In fact, several times we had surveys taken, in automobile surveys, a Hooper survey, showed that our music station had the largest radio audience in town against 4 networks. At the time I bought the station, everybody said, "You're crazy. Without a network, you'll starve to death." But we soon became the #1 station in the market. And what's really amazing, this was a daytime station. We had no audience at night because we closed down at sundown. Mm-hmm. But people liked popular music at that time.
And there came a time when you ventured forth into yet another uncharted area, FM.
Yeah.
In those days, AM was dominant.
Right.
And I
really messed up there. I thought I was going to jump ahead of everybody. I was going to be #1 in the market for FM. And in fact, that was my downfall, because I went into it. I'd been on WIVY, and we were the #1 station in the market for a long time. Decided I had to have a full-time station, so I got an FM license. And I put $100,000 into the FM license. It was none here. It's #1, only 1 station. So it developed. I put it on the air and had no audience.
No one could receive FM, basically, right?
There were no radios.
Yeah.
But I assumed that people would be buying radios, but after about a year, I had no income from the station, no advertisers, because there was very few radios. So I lost enough money to quit, and I sold WIVY after 20 years.
And now, of course, we've come to the point where FM is the dominant.
Absolutely. I knew that, but I jumped in a little too early.
Mm-hmm.
I was the first FM station here in Jacksonville, but there was no FM radios to speak of. And eventually they did build up a big audience, but at that time I didn't have the funds to continue to lose money on it.
This is not unlike the TV station that came on the air, the one we're sitting into for this conversation.
Yeah.
Channel 4, in 1949, no one had a TV set.
Yeah.
So the mission was to try to get people to buy a TV set so they could watch the TV station.
Well, you know, I had the opportunity to build a TV station, get a license.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't have enough nerve, as Glenn Marshall and the other fellows did, to get Channel 4. The FCC was very interested in having local ownership. So I would have been welcomed with an application, but it was far too expensive for me. Well, I sold WIVY in 1979, and I searched for another station. I wanted to, after a year of retirement, I tried to find another station, but couldn't find one, other than going way down south. So Jack Jones and I had been close friends because we both operated a radio. I operated a radio school and he operated a business school. So we used to travel to the meetings a lot. So I decided to go to see him and see if he would sell me his station. So I talked to him and I offered him $400,000 for his small station on FM. He had a little audience, very little audience. But he said, I'll make a better deal with you. You don't have to give me anything. You take over the station and take out whatever percentage you want and run them. So I said, well, I can do the same thing without spending any of my money, and I did. And that's the way we ran for the years I was there. And it was just as if I owned it, I could do whatever I want. But he was happy because from number 13, I made it number 1 in the market. It was that way for many years.
And this is where a lot of people will remember you from daily radio commentaries on Jones College Radio.
Well, how I got into that was not by choice. I had been on the air as a disc jockey for many years. In fact, on WIVY, I did my own show there at the beginning, but the government required that you do so much public service on FM. So I figured the best way to do it was for me to do a commentary every day about local activities. And I got into it that way, and so I started it to comply with the FCC requirement that you do local commitments to local subjects. So I started, I guess 1980, or 70 when I went there. So for 10 years I was doing those radio commentaries to comply with the FCC rules. So we kept recording them and printing them. Mm-hmm. So each year we'd print a book of all of the commentaries I ran, so it was very nice. And at the end, when I left the station, I had all the tapes of my program that started in 1970. I went through 1996 when they stopped the commentary. And what happened was last year my house burned down and all of my tapes burned with it. So I lost all of those programs.
So the tapes burned, but of course the written version of the commentaries are still available. A lot of them in books.
I did. I wrote a book called Against All Odds, and I have a lot of those commentaries.
Ed, another thing we want to talk about is the emergency broadcast
Yeah, I'd like
system.
to talk about that. What happened was I was a member of the board of Florida Association of Broadcasters. We had monthly meetings in Gainesville at the University of Florida. And when the FCC started issuing licenses for stations that would broadcast public emergencies, I took active part. I was a member of the board of directors, and I was assigned the job of getting emergency broadcasting broadcasts in Florida by the board. So I had called meetings in every area, Miami, Pensacola, Tampa, and Jacksonville, and got the stations together, because it was not easy to get them to cut into their programs, especially television, to put on a emergency broadcasting test. And we had to have tests regularly. So I had to go all over the state into the 5 districts in Orlando, Miami, Tampa, Pensacola, and Jacksonville, and have meetings to get all of the stations to comply, because they were very reluctant to get involved with, especially television, with cutting into their TV programs for an emergency.
And just to make sure everyone understands, this functions in situations, hurricanes and other emergencies, as a means of communicating with people.
Well, it was an essential public service, there's no doubt about it, because as it is now, we get a lot of news about the hurricanes before they get here. And so the FCC made the rule that you can interrupt a program with this emergency broadcast. So,
and this system was copied in other states around the country.
Yeah, it went all over the country.
So you are the guy who's responsible for that annoying screech that...
Yeah. Here, all about the same time, other states were doing the same thing, I'm sure, but it wasn't easy, because you can understand that television stations don't want to interrupt a good program for no special reason, and they considered this no special reason. But they all complied, and it became very valuable.
And you've written a book, which will be coming out soon, we hope, called Against All Odds.
Yes, right.
And it opens with a very compelling sentence. I was kidnapped on my way to school when I was 5 years old and never saw my mother again.
That's a fact, yeah.
And you were kidnapped by your father.
Yes, yes.
So tell us a little bit about that, and a lot of struggles with poverty and hardship in your early years.
My father kidnapped me on the way to school when I was 5 years old, and because he was on the outs with my mother, and we wound up in Baltimore, Maryland, the day he kidnapped me, and I never saw my mother again the rest of my life. But we traveled, and the police were out after us because he had kidnapped me. And we stayed in Baltimore, Maryland for about 6 months when the police found us. And the landlady where we were staying said, the police were here looking for you, and my father came home. So he grabbed everything and put it in a trunk, and we caught a train and went to Akron, Ohio. And we lived there for 8 or 9 months. And again, the police came looking, and the landlady said, the police were here today looking for you, to him when he got home. We immediately got on a train and left. And in this time, we got on a freight train because we had to get out of Akron, Ohio, and we went to Providence, Kentucky on a freight train. And that was quite an experience for a little boy. We were on the train, it took us a couple of days making changes on the freight train. In the meantime, there was a lot of tomatoes growing in the fields as we went, so we lived on tomatoes for 2 days until we got to... My father wanted to go to Kentucky because there were a lot of good jobs in the coal mines. So that's where we wound up eventually, in Providence, Kentucky. And he worked in a coal mine there for a couple of years until he decided to go to Evansville, Indiana, which was close to where we were, a place to get a better job. So I wound up there at about 6 or 7 years of age and spent the rest of my young life there, going to school, high school, and so on. Eventually wound up, during the Depression, we moved to Indianapolis, and it was terrible.